The file in front of you was never officially closed. The investigators moved on. The witnesses stopped talking. The leads ran dry, but the case never closed. What you are about to hear has been documented. The timeline, the evidence, the questions that were never answered. Welcome to case number unknown. Let's open the file. On the evening of December 7th, 1971, neighbors in Westfield, New Jersey, noticed something peculiar about the sprawling Victorian mansion at 431 Hillside Avenue. Every light in the house was on. Every single one. They would stay on, burning day and night, for nearly a month. And behind those illuminated windows, 5 bodies lay cooling on sleeping bags, arranged side by side in the grand ballroom, as if someone had taken great care to give them a dignified resting place. That someone was the man of the house, a father, a husband, a Sunday school teacher named John Emil List. And by the time anyone discovered what he had done, he had already disappeared from the face of the earth. To understand how a quiet, deeply religious man became one of America's most methodical family annihilators, you have to understand the world John List built around himself and the unbearable pressure of watching it crumble. Born on September 17, 1925, in Bay City, Michigan, John List grew up in a strict Lutheran household. His mother, Alma, was devout to the point of rigidity, and she instilled in her son a fierce commitment to appearances, to order, and above all, to the belief that outward respectability was inseparable from spiritual salvation. John was an obedient child, a dutiful student, and by all outward measures, exactly the kind of man mid-century America celebrated. He served in World War II and the Korean War, earned a master's degree in accounting, married a woman named Helen Morris Taylor in 1951, and set about constructing the picture-perfect American life. But John List was building a house of cards, and by the late 1960s, every card was beginning to slip. He and Helen had 3 children: Patricia, born in 1955, John Frederick in 1956, and Frederick Michael in 1958. The family moved into Breeze Knoll, the massive 19-room Victorian mansion in Westfield, a home far beyond their means. List had purchased it partly to impress, partly because his mother Alma, who was growing elderly and frail, needed a place to live. The mortgage was crushing. Helen, meanwhile, had developed a serious drinking problem and was suffering from what doctors believed was tertiary syphilis contracted from her first husband, causing progressive brain deterioration. She became increasingly erratic, withdrawn, and difficult. The children were growing into teenagers of the early 70s, and to John List's horror, his daughter Patricia was showing interest in drugs, counterculture, and witchcraft. His eldest son was developing behavioral problems. The pristine Lutheran family portrait List had spent decades maintaining was rotting from within. And then there was the secret that John List guarded more jealously than any other. He had lost his job. In 1971, he was fired from his position as a vice president at a bank in Jersey City. Rather than tell his family, rather than admit failure, John List continued the charade. Every morning, he dressed in his suit, picked up his briefcase, and drove to the Westfield train station. But he never boarded a train. Instead, he sat in the station reading newspapers, or drove aimlessly, or sat alone in his car, waiting for the hours to pass so he could return home as if nothing had changed. He did this for months. The bills mounted. The mortgage fell into arrears. He began draining his mother's savings accounts to keep the household afloat, all while maintaining his role as a church elder and Sunday school superintendent at Redeemer Lutheran Church. John List was drowning, and in his mind, warped by decades of rigid religious thinking, he arrived at a solution so monstrous it defies comprehension. He convinced himself that his family was on a path to spiritual destruction. Helen was sick and drinking. Patricia was dabbling in the occult. The boys were drifting. If they continued down this road, List believed, they would lose their souls. But if he killed them now, while they were still baptized Christians, While their souls were still theoretically in a state of grace, they would go to heaven. He would sacrifice his own salvation, he reasoned, by committing murder, but he would save theirs. It was, in his mind, an act of love. On the morning of November 9th, 1971, John List set his plan in motion with the cold precision of an accountant balancing a ledger. After his children left for school and his wife sat in the kitchen drinking coffee, he walked up behind Helen and shot her in the head with a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. She slumped forward over her toast. He then climbed the stairs to the third-floor apartment where his 85-year-old mother, Alma, lived. He shot her once above the left eye. She collapsed in the hallway of her small kitchen. List then went back downstairs, made himself lunch, and waited. At approximately 12:15, his youngest son, Frederick, arrived home from school. List shot the 16-year-old in the back of the head. He dragged the boy's body into the ballroom. Patricia arrived next. She was shot as she entered the kitchen. List moved her body to join Frederick's. Then he waited for his eldest son, John Jr., to finish a soccer game at school. When the boy arrived home, List shot him multiple times. John Jr., unlike the others, fought back, tried to run. List had to shoot him again and again, up to 10 times according to some accounts, before the boy finally stopped moving. With his entire family dead, John List did not panic. He did not flee immediately. Instead, he went about a series of deliberate, calculated actions designed to give himself the maximum head start. He dragged each body into the ballroom and laid them out on sleeping bags. He placed a cloth over his mother's face, but left the others exposed. He knelt beside them and prayed. He then turned on the radio in the ballroom to an all-music station. He turned on every light in the house. He set the thermostat as low as it would go, knowing the cold would slow decomposition. He cut his own image out of every family photograph in the house, a detail so chilling in its vanity that investigators would later marvel at it. He wrote a 5-page letter to his pastor, Reverend Eugene Rewinkle, meticulously explaining his reasoning, his theological justifications, and his belief that he had saved his family from spiritual ruin. In the letter, he specifically asked that the church hold a proper funeral for his family and noted that he would not be attending because he planned to disappear. Then John List got in his car and drove away. The bodies were not discovered for nearly a month. The lights burning constantly, the mail piling up, the children's absence from school eventually prompted Patricia's drama teacher, Ed Iliano, to alert authorities. On December 7, 1971, police entered Breeze Knoll and found the scene in the ballroom exactly as List had left it. The 5-page confession letter was found in a filing cabinet, tucked in an envelope addressed to the pastor. An arrest warrant was issued immediately for John Emil List, but by then, the trail was ice cold. The investigation was massive but fruitless. List had vanished completely, and in 1971, before computerized databases, before the internet, before the surveillance infrastructure of the modern world, a man who wanted to disappear could do so with shocking ease. The FBI placed List on their most wanted list, but years passed. The mansion at Breeze Knoll burned to the ground in a suspicious fire in 1972, as if the earth itself wanted to erase the horror. Leads dried up. Witnesses faded. John List became a ghost story, a cautionary tale whispered in Westfield, the monster who got away. For 18 years, that is exactly what he was. 18 years of nothing. 18 years during which John List was not hiding in a bunker or living under a bridge. He had driven to Denver, Colorado, assumed the name Robert Peter Clark, found work as an accountant, joined a Lutheran church, and eventually remarried a woman named Dolores Miller in 1985. He was living in Richmond, Virginia, attending church, paying taxes, going to work. He had rebuilt the same life, the same quiet, orderly, respectable facade, as if nothing had happened, as if 5 people were not lying in the cold earth because of him. The break came not from traditional detective work, but from television. In 1989, the television program America's Most Wanted aired a segment on the List case. The show's producers commissioned forensic sculptor Frank Bender to create an age-progressed bust of what John List might look like nearly 2 decades after the murders. Bender studied photographs of List, consulted with psychologists about how List might have aged, and even added glasses, reasoning that a man this methodical would choose the most conservative frames available. The bust was astonishingly accurate. 11 days after the episode aired, a tip came in from Aurora, Colorado. A woman named Wanda Flannery, a former neighbor of Robert Peter Clark, saw the bust on television and felt a shock of recognition. She called the tip line. The FBI investigated, and fingerprint analysis confirmed it. Robert Peter Clark was John Emil List. On June 1, 1989, FBI agents arrested List at his accounting office in Richmond, Virginia. He was 63 years old. He showed no emotion when they told him why he was there. The trial, held in 1990, was a spectacle. List's defense team attempted an insanity plea, arguing that he had suffered from obsessive-compulsive personality disorder and that his rigid religious beliefs constituted a form of mental illness. Psychiatrists testified on both sides, but the prosecution hammered one point above all others: the meticulous planning. The letter, the cut photographs, the thermostat turned down, the lights left on. This was not madness. This was calculation. On April 12, 1990, John List was found guilty on 5 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive terms of life imprisonment. In prison, List continued to insist that he had acted out of love. In rare interviews, he expressed no remorse in any conventional sense, only a cold, clinical regret that he had been unable to find another way. He never apologized to the families of his victims. He never acknowledged the horror of what he had done in human terms. When asked if he thought about his children, he said he prayed for them. When asked if he thought God had forgiven him, he said he hoped so. John Emil List died in prison on March 21, 2008, at the age of 82, at a hospital in Trenton, New Jersey, not far from where he had committed his crimes nearly 4 decades earlier. He died of complications from pneumonia. He never expressed genuine remorse. The case of John List remains one of the most disturbing family annihilation cases in American criminal history, not because of its violence, which was swift and clinical, but because of the mind behind it. A man so consumed by the need for control, so imprisoned by his own rigid worldview, that he could methodically execute 5 members of his own family and then calmly rebuild his life as if they had never existed. The letter he left behind is still studied by criminal psychologists today, a window into a kind of evil that does not rage or froth, but sits quietly in a pew on Sunday morning, hands folded, eyes closed in prayer. So here is the question this case leaves us with. John List believed he was saving his family's souls. He believed he was making a sacrifice. But can faith, twisted far enough, become the most dangerous weapon of all? And in those 18 years he spent free, attending church, remarrying, living as Robert Peter Clark, did he ever truly believe he had done the right thing? Or was the mask simply all he had left? The investigation is ongoing. If you have a case you think deserves a file, leave it in the comments. New files open every week. Subscribe, because the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how long it takes.